Hey everyone, here's the next critique. In this assignment, we're looking for your use of color primarily. Coupled with that, I'm going to be looking at your drawing and value arrangements, of course, always building on those tools, but primarily I'm going to be looking to see what we can do in terms of color. And so let's go ahead and jump into it. This is Morgan, and this is a nice painting, Morgan. You've got a lot. You took this painting pretty far. Um, and I'm glad that you put in the effort there. A few things that catch my eye primarily have to do with drawing. I think that that's kind of holding this painting back, is the drawing. And then in terms of color, I think you're doing pretty well in terms of finding the color for each area, but I think it can be made better through a little bit more solid value statement, or a little bit clearer value statement. So some of the problems, now I know the models move when you're painting them from life, and it's hard to get the drawing in correctly, but one thing that really helps me is establishing um, the overall tilt. So I go from the between the eyes. Let me make sure I've got a brush that'll work. So I go between the eyes, straight down, in between the lips, something like that. And that will generally give me the tilt of the head. So I go from here down through here, and this generally gives me the tilt. This is sort of the center line that most people think of when they mention center line. And what you'll notice as well is the eyes will be going perpendicular to that line. And so when we start looking at our painting, if we can establish these lines early and know that the rest of the features are going to build off of that sort of center line, that will give us, even if the model moves, that will allow us to get accurate, or the appearance of accurate drawing, even when the model moves around. And so when we look for that same center line on the painting, we get, it's close in its tilt. If I get it, if I can actually draw this morning. I'm sorry, I'm still still waking up, but if I can get the center line and then find the same two lines here through the eyes, you're getting a pretty good perpendicular sense to it, but the other features seem to be getting a little lost. Which is very common when you start looking at the nose or the mouth without looking at how they relate to the rest of the features. You can get kind of caught up in their details, and so that's something we need to kind of avoid. Another thing that I think you could benefit from is looking at alignment. So edge of the nose straight up is the inside of that eye. So I go edge of the nose straight up, and I'm at the corner of the eye. From the wing of the nostril straight up, I'm at the inside of the eye. And this one's a little bit closer, but you can tell that there's something happening to either the nose or to the eye, and I think it could be both in terms of drawing. Let's do another alignment over here. Let's test the mouth. Comes the outside of that iris, and then we're almost there. So I know that the eye probably needs to move a little bit, and the nose may need to move a little bit as well. I'm looking at the negative shapes being formed sort of right here and right here, and you can see they're not quite the same distance. This is how we achieve accuracy. From the live model, it's a far harder deal, and so your drawing is kind of harder to manage. But when we get the photo and we bring it back home, we can start to assess these things, use more alignments, and it will get us a greater sense of accuracy. everything, we're getting into fun color, we're getting into, all kinds of ways to interpret things, but if they don't sit on a foundation of good drawing, uh, then they're not going to be working as well. So let's go ahead and like move some of these things around a little bit. So I know, let's go ahead and get our alignments back on the reference. So I know the eye is going to have to be over here. Um, As well, I think the distance from the eye to the nose is a little too large. Primarily because I feel like that nose is a little big, if that makes sense. So I feel like the ball of her nose right here, so sort of this large area, is too big compared to the ball of her nose over here. And that tipped me off to thinking that maybe this space is too large. So how are we going to go about changing this stuff? I'm going to go ahead and grab the shadow. I'm going to give it a little bit more of a red hue. And in this way, I'm pushing the color that I'm seeing into a definite direction. A lot of times when we're painting, you can get caught up in the nuance, and often confidence reads better to most people, meaning that if I confidently choose a hue, I see a shadow that's a little red and I make it definitely in the red family, for whatever reason, even if it's not completely correct, it reads more correct to the viewer. I don't know why that is, really, but it's something that I've observed and something that I like. And now I don't think it's 100% truthful all the time, but it is something I've observed pretty regularly. So we have to correct just a little bit of this drawing. Now I'm drawing with near black, and so I'm going to have to give a color to this. So let's go ahead and give it a hue. Let's give it a little bit more of an orangey hue. Okay. Let's do another alignment. I'm getting closer. That eye still needs to come over. Bring it over a little bit further. I'm going to draw the ball of that eye. Kind of just blacking out everything in there, but hoping that once I get the eye a little bit closer, that will help the rest of the face. You'll notice too, if the eye is placed too far over, the shape on the cheek becomes too large, and we start running out of, everything just starts growing, and that can be a real problem. So let's go ahead and I'm going to darken up these shadows, and I'm going to bring them in just a little bit. You did a really pretty nice job on the shapes. It just looks like maybe, and now I don't know if this is going to 100% fix it, or we're going to have to do some work here. This is my initial idea of how to approach the painting. So I'm going to grab that pink as well. I'm going to move this over, soften this edge, and then probably make her forehead shorter as well. Big and soft. Now I want to kind of pull that nose back as well. So we're getting this nose. The edge of the nose comes here. I'm going to try to redefine some of the drawing. I'm going to darken in the whole bottom plane a little bit and raise it up a little bit. And simplify. My personal aesthetic, and when I'm painting, often I'm thinking not how can I get all of the details in, but what are the most important details to have? and make sure that I nail those areas. Um, if I just try to hit everything most of the time, especially from painting when painting from life, I'll miss. I won't get the important stuff. I won't get the unimportant stuff, and I just kind of the painting isn't as strong as it could have been, and so I tend to just try to limit what I'm trying to capture and make sure I really nail it down. Um, so we'll go like this. And let's move, I think we can move this eye, making it a little bit darker, a little bit cooler. And I kind of want to, oh, that's too cool. It's a little too cool still. Probably need to get a little bit more red. Anyway, so I need to move this eye because the space here is just not enough, I think. So then the eye's going to come out here. Just push it over to the left a little bit further. And if I were doing it in actual paint, this is the exact steps I'd be following too. These are how I would be trying to assess. I might, scrape a little bit of paint off before I went in and did too much of this, but I'd be trying to pull the drawing back into proportion, and sometimes that is like the hardest thing to do. It's when I spot an error and I just spent, an hour painting these eyes, and then I realize they need to move or something needs to change. That's the hardest. That is so hard to do. But that is what separates what I believe good from great artists is when there's a problem, they find the solution and they don't let anything stand in their way to correct it. Even if it means that the last few hours was a waste, it really makes for a little bit of a stronger painting. They'll do it. Okay. And so let me find a little bit more of this shape. I think primarily what happened was the proportions on the eyes, between the eyes and the rest of the features, often when they go a little awry or a little off, you're spending the rest of the painting just trying to fix them, or spending a lot of time just trying to correct the drawing, and that's why we need to practice drawing as much as possible, because if I can just get the drawing and not worry about it, then I can worry about the important color and value information, and it will really help out there. So I'm going to make some of this darker on this side. And I'm also going to place a more of a pink hue. So I don't think that the colors that you use are necessarily bad or wrong. I just feel like we can bring a little bit more character to them by bringing out a little bit more of the color family. As we went lighter for the skin tones, we went, I think, a little too light, and we lost that sense of a color family. Meaning that it still feels yellow, but it's kind of like a weak yellow. But if instead I come in and I say, okay, now it's definitely, I'm going off the photo reference, so it's going to be not 100% the same. But if I definitely make it a color, a real definite color, it becomes just a little bit easier. Now, it's not always the case to make it red, but a lot of times if I make it just a red, especially on a fair complexion person, a lighter complexion person, it will feel more like lifelike. So it'll feel more like it's got life in it. So I don't know if you can see that, but this sort of yellowish color that is losing a little bit of saturation. If I make it a little bit more red and I give it a little more saturation, it will start feeling a little bit more like life. So I'm going to go ahead and continue that down, and I'm going to make it a little bit desaturated and a little bit darker, and just to make it a little bit cooler as it comes down to the chin. And then on this neck, I know it goes very bright through there, but I would probably bring down the value. Um, it's surrounded by so many darks that if I even put the same value that is on the face next to those darks, it will actually look lighter than those on the face. So that's just kind of managing this sort of optical illusion that happens, and just kind of quieting that down. Now we're getting a real nice warm here, but again, it goes real yellow and it goes really warm. I might, tone down the warmth a little. It's a lot of it. Just tone down the warmth a little bit so it goes warmer, but not necessarily super warm. And that will create a better harmony between my colors than just putting a really sort of bright warm in there. Now the highlights have gone white, but let's give it a color. So let's make it more of a, let's go to a cooler violet. Let's make it like a violet. Why not? Let's make it a fun color, and we're just going to, help that read as being it's still red, but it is cooler than the rest of the skin tone. Now that might be a little far. It's kind of out of harmony a little bit. It's a little too cool, so I'm gonna have to tone it back a little bit. But it can be fun to play with giving the highlights a definite color, and that way it reads a little bit more like light. Let's give this inside here just a little bit bigger. Soften this edge out. Soften this edge out. And as we get it up in through here, so just a little bit more refinement through these areas, but now we can come in and start pushing the sense of color. So this cast shadow, let's go ahead and make it a little bit more of a yellow, and a little bit lighter. And then this other shadow, I know it's got a different cast, so let's give a little bit more of a yellow to that rim light. And then I can use that warmer brown as my core shadow. There's not a huge jump in value, but I'm just trying to use primarily color shifts to communicate that secondary light source. You've got a nice pink lip. Let's make it a little bit lighter and a little bit cooler. Right. Underneath the lip, let's make it a little bit warmer and a little bit darker to fit in with the rest of the shadows. Just maybe that's a little too warm. Let's go a little more towards that red. Let's desaturate it a little bit. Maybe a little bit darker. Something along those lines. So I'm trying to make, normally with the shadow color, often I'm trying to find how I can unify them. Often shadows work to support the lights primarily, instead of being like their own sort of area of emphasis. So something to think about. Also make her eyebrow just a little bit darker. And then soften it. And I think we can get some darker, cooler reds on this sort of, I can't remember what this is called. The Golbella? No. What is that? The brow notch or whatever. Just a little bit lighter. There we go. Something like that. Okay. I think we can get a little bit more red in and around the eyes. Just a more evidence of a definite hue. We'd probably go more red on the cheek. pushing that hue. So it really got that hue, and then as it comes up, maybe it goes a little bit warmer, a little bit lighter up through here. And I can maybe push that same warmth on this other side. So really, all I'm looking at in this painting is drawing and pushing a little bit stronger sense of whatever color it is within the painting. So something like that. Let's go ahead and do a little bit of drawing here for the upper lid, and then I'm going to try to soften it out. There's still it's still lacking a little bit of contrast. I wonder if it's because the darks have already pretty much dried, but her hair is lacking some definite punch to it. So I wonder if we could get it to go darker and lean slightly warm to fit in with the rest of the color scheme. So this jacket feels very dark, and I think that this hair can go into the same group. So just going way darker through there. This is going to really help in terms of supporting the read. And I know I'm looking at a photo and it's not the best, but if I just take the time and I just sort of darken all of this up, I hope that it will support the final image a little bit better. Darkening. Getting a little bit darker. Let's get a little bit of a different color for the hair tie or the hair band or whatever it is. A little bit darker. And then I think these back here can go a little bit darker as well. You've got the color, but in terms of supporting the statement, you have to be careful not to go too bright in the background, because then the contrast will stay in the background. That's something I want to try to avoid. Same thing with this one. If I go just a bit darker, it will group in with my other groups. I think that will start supporting the statement a little bit better. Grouping in with the hair. I think that starts to help. And then let's look at the neck. So often the neck is a difficult area for most people to draw or to conceive. The neck is attaching at the back of your head, right? So it attaches right at the back, and it has two muscles that come down into your trapezius here. Now you can't see that. You're like, I drew over the eye, but I'm thinking of where the back of her head is, and I'm drawing that in. And then the front of her neck is giving us some trouble, some issue. When I look at it, generally though, if I want to have a sort of elegant neck, I'll find directly below where it is in terms of plumb line, and then often I'll draw it in at an angle, and then I'll find the sternocleidomastoid and I'll draw that one out. Or I can do it through two convex shapes. But the idea is I'm trying to think of the anatomy and then draw it a little more elegantly. So on a guy, if I draw the neck, like this, he might have a kind of a pencil neck, but then if I add the trapezius, then he's got a stronger kind of neck to him. On a woman, if I do the same thing and I make it a little too thick, it'll feel a little bit too much like a football player, and so I'm going to go ahead and shorten or make the neck a little bit thinner. Draw in a little bit of a collar here, and then we'll just send it down. So I'm making that shape smaller anyway. I'm not saying this is always the thing to do, but often if I can get a smaller neck on a woman without it looking too out of place, often that is it's a little bit more flattering, and it's a little bit nicer. That's kind of the direction where those are the main things that I'm seeing that I'd like to see. Going forward with these areas where I made it darker, I could always go in and make it, where it goes a slight bit red, I can make it just a little bit more red. Where it goes, a little bit violet, I can make it a little bit more violet. So let's see. So it looks like it's going violet in here. I can make it a little bit more violet. It looks like it's going a little cool. So I can go a little bit warmer. Maybe I can push a little bit more color in there. There you go. And so now I get a little bit more color. So as I start navigating the painting, that's the main idea that I'm looking at least for this painting. Finding a color that is representative of the shape, and then using that color to describe the shape, pushing it. And through that, I think you'll get more confidence out of your color choices, but also it reads a little bit more confidently to the viewer. One last thing I would do is add some warmth into the darks inside the ear. There's so much blood happening in there, the skin's so thin that if I just make it a little bit darker, a little bit warmer, like overall, even if I see like grays and neutrals happening in the ear, I will get a better sense of life again. And we can also make it a little bit more red, like I was saying, push the color of the ear. So I'm going to go ahead and push the reddish pink into that ear just a little bit more. And that will give me an even better sense of that nice life that's happening in there. That you're kind of losing when you start to paint from a photo. It's really there, but the photo kind of washes it out. And so sometimes when I'm painting from photos, I see the color, but I'm interpreting it way more saturated because I know that's what's really happening in terms of life. So those are my main critiques. You can go in and we can finish off and draw in all kinds of things. Little highlights, or that one's not little, it's kind of huge. But I can go in and start, rendering form and doing the exact same things that we've been talking about. But I think that I've given you enough to kind of get you started. And so if you can make these adjustments, mainly color and drawing, if you can make those adjustments, I think it will really start to help with this painting. So it was really nice painting, really has some integrity to it. It's feeling nice and pushed. Now it's a matter of turning it to the next level, changing it so that it's even stronger, and where to do that. In this case, I believe it's drawing and color. So anyway, let me know if you have any questions. Let's go on to the next one. We're to Zachariah. Hey, Zachariah. It's a nice one again. You're upping the finish again, which is great. And I like that the reference has improved since last week, since the folded paper. Yeah, this is helping. Looking at it, I'm looking to see a sense of color, a little bit more, and drawing, and so that's what I'm mainly looking at here. I think you've done a really nice job on the overall, the drawing and execution on the hair and skin, and overall, it's a nice painting. There's just some things that kind of stand out to me. So, looking at it, and this is something I noticed from life, the skin and light was lighter than the background. Yes, it's a white cloth, but it's in shadow. This is a middle value, but it's in light, and so it comes up to you of how you want to make it read. In here, you made the background darker than the skin and light, but here you've reversed it. And so we run into a little bit of an issue in terms of the read, in terms of we're looking at this value matrix, and now we got to make sure that it still has the same impact that we were going for. So I'm going to quickly just try to darken up the background here, just to show you how the read would go closer to your value matrix if we just darkened the background. We got a nice dark figure on a light background, but if want to get it closer. Now this is closer to life, but still is lacking a little bit of a read. So I might go even just a little bit darker. Okay, and then let's turn it into a not that one, an overlay. Let's try a dark. Oh, multiply. No, let's try darken layer. Okay. And so this is kind of the idea that graphically that I was thinking of when you set up this day. Just a matter of trying to make those areas that you want to read, and in your value matrix, I think that you were going for a read in the light on the skin, light on skin and light. And it's important that if I establish that in my value matrix, that I don't, just sort of throw that out, but you're planning, and so you follow through with your plan, and I think you can get better results that way. So we're looking from here, where the contrast lives on the outside, back of the head, kind of getting lost in the face a little bit, to being brought in a little bit more. It's a little bit more subtle. I think we could probably play it up by putting, if I go, even a little bit darker through here. Maybe I even play with that value matrix even more. Play down, the background, and now we're getting a completely different read than this. Okay, not saying that one is more correct than the other, but one is highlighting a different portion of the face and head, and so it's an important consideration. There's a background back there, but can you play with it? Can you maybe grab the colors that are around his mouth and nose here, sort of these seat supporters and the heater, and use those values to define the head? Those are ideas to play with and try to design more than just be subject to what's behind the head. This is a little far. I think this is a little bit more subtle and a little bit closer to life. Just pushed a little bit more subtly. But this is a similar idea to what I might have played up with. Now, I don't think I would have filled it in entirely. I might have gotten something, a little bit different, not quite like that. But that's just one idea that I would, sort of point you in the direction of. Looking at the rest of the painting, it's looking good. I think some of the shapes can be played up a little bit better, a little bit more accurately. There's a little bit of drawing error, and so let's go ahead and start by looking at a few shapes here. So just to get us started, let's outline some shapes. So I'm going to go the light shape hitting his cheek here. Down to the nose, and I'm just going to look at just this shape down to his mouth. Let's just do this shape. So I've outlined the whole shape. Let's do the same one over here. Down to his mouth, up, and I hope what you can start to see is they're fundamentally different shapes. If I then take it another step, and let's pull him down into here. So let's go and pull them down, and I'm going to make them a little bit smaller. So let's look at the shapes, how they compare to each other down here. Oops. That was Morgan's. Let's look at these shapes together. So not necessarily shies, but what type of shape. So you're getting quite close. It's the same character. If this were a country, this would still be, like Brazil, and this is Brazil. You could argue that they're roughly the same shape, but the difference being that this body of this one is much thicker. So I see a much thicker shape here into this tapered point, and then a little bit flatter up here. Okay, and then maybe a little bit more rounding, and then maybe a little bit more rounding. But that's getting me closer than where it was. So let's go back. So I'm going from this shape to this shape. Do you see how it fills out? And that's getting closer to what I'm seeing here. It's not perfect, but that's what I'm striving for in terms of understanding how to get likeness. It's taking your shapes and getting them that precise. Okay? So from here to here, that's a big jump. So anyway, that's the main kind of thing I'm seeing in here, is that you're getting the right shapes, you're getting roughly the right proportions and everything like that, but they're just a little off. Just a little bit. That's where your accuracy is going to improve. That's where you're going to start getting a better sense of life. Is that once you get in, the general statement of everything, then you can go in and start being a little bit more accurate or a little more precise, and that will really up your paintings. I think that sensitivity to the shapes, that sensitivity to drawing, is what is making people good to great painters. That real, attentiveness. So let's see if we can't go with, a little bit lighter skin tone and light, a little bit pinker, maybe a little bit cooler, and those ideas connect into this eye here, and then those connect into here, and then we're getting a bit more body out of this shape, maybe a bit less body right here, carving it down. I'll come back to his nose, but I'm doing the same thing on all the shapes. I'm just looking, starting big in general, but then I'm working and I'm looking to see how each shape is behaving. What are the proportions of every shape? It's important to get the big ones right first so that I can invest the time in the little ones without getting, off course. But you can see I'm just altering the shapes ever so slightly, and hopefully through this we'll get a better result. Looking at the nose now, I'm going to go to the bridge of the nose, and then what I'm seeing is the nose comes, it's a larger, whereas cartilage comes out, it's larger. It sticks out a little bit further, and then I get the ball of the nose. And I might have messed up the original drawing with my overlay. Yeah, I can see that now. But trying to just pull that edge of the nose out ever so slightly, making the ball of the nose a little bit bigger, I think, and then setting back the brow, and then maybe pulling this one out a little bit. It's going to help us. I want to do an alignment on the chin here. The chin is back in front of the eye, or just in front of the eye. So I think you got it pretty good there, but I think maybe it can come out just a little bit. And that was my kind of suspicion, is that it was tilted back a little too far, and the upper lip is back a little too far. So we find the nostril. We're going to bring that upper lip back out. Okay. And then I'm going to find the bottom lip, and it's going to come out a little bit further. And then I'm going to get the chin down here, and I think it's going to come out a little bit further as well. And now it could probably be because he was, he moves. He's a model that moves quite a bit. And so your alignments might have gotten thrown off a little bit by that. And I get that. But the photo's here, and so you can use it to correct any alignments, just to make sure that everything sort of falls into line with each other. That's kind of an important thing. Just filling out those shapes a little bit further, giving it a little bit more of a chin, giving it a little bit more, maybe even carving in a little bit the lower part of his neck there, and then using a convex and a convex line to make his neck fill out a little bit more. Give him a little bit more shape, a little more volume. Soften this edge and try to get this drawing on this forehead shape a little bit more accurate. It looks like it goes in a little bit more at the top and then out at the brow. And then we're getting some of this cool hair. And then I think we need to revisit this eye a little bit. It's kind of getting lost a little bit. It's probably because of my drawing, but I think we can maybe make him look a little bit more forward. And then use this shape here to help draw that nose. So I'm seeing now I need to go a little bit warmer and a little more saturated in these areas, and then we can go maybe a little bit more nose, a little bit bigger shape right there. Soften and warm up. So as far as the drawing goes, these are really small changes. These aren't doing much, but I think they are helping with the likeness and the overall appeal of the painting. So these are, although they're small, I think they're making some important changes to the overall head. Now let's talk a little bit more about the color. And so looking at it, we're getting some really nice color. I think it's some really nice stuff. I think what we can do though is play a little bit with temperature, and we can play a little bit more with giving a little bit stronger of a hue. So let's go a little bit more yellow. A little bit cooler maybe on the shadow up here, and then maybe breathe just a little bit of life, just a little bit of light. I know normally we go your separation of light, skin and light and skin and shadow were too close, but now because we made the light side just a little bit lighter, we can actually get away with lightening up the shadows a little bit and looking for a little bit more of a temperature and color shift in here, which is really nice. So a little bit cooler back here. I think the colors that you're getting in on this ear are great. I think you just need to find a little more definite shapes to the color. I think what you were getting was really, really great, but now it's a matter of just nailing them down a little bit more. Looking at the transitions between these shapes, so it goes a little bit darker, but not that much darker. Through on the jaw there, probably get a little bit more warmth, and a little bit darker as it goes towards these neck hairs or whatever, softer edged back there. Okay. We don't want all of our edges to be the same. Like if you look at this hair, it's the same sort of jagged line all the way around. And if I look in here and I squint, there's just a soft, dark, warm gradation in here. And so instead of going through and adding a hard edge or adding those hairs, I'm just going to soften it out and imply that there's some complexity happening in there. I'm going to cool down a little bit the warmth that's under his chin and do something a little bit like that. So what's happening is with the temperature and the value that's here, it's a little too contrasting between these areas. And so what I needed to do was tone it down in terms of value contrast and then use the color contrast more. And I think that starts to communicate just a little bit better. We can use that same soft edge and darkening around the hair to make it feel like the edges are not the same. So in some areas I'll use that darkening, that softening. Some of the hair out here I'll soften. I don't want it to feel like it's got the same exact chiseled edge, because it doesn't. If you go area by area, sure, you can probably convince yourself that it has the same edge to everywhere, but some of it is softer, some of it is harder, some of it is more defined, some of it is less defined. So we're getting a little bit closer through there. Now I would also desaturate. This saturation on the shirt is kind of nice that it separates from, it kind of pulls the figure forward, and I like that. But I think having both light and shadow, the same amount of saturation, is kind of tough. They're the light side's a little more saturated, but I think they're both pretty desaturated, but I'm going to try to eliminate one of them. And so let's go ahead and bring down the light just to see what happens. So I'm going to bring down the saturation in the light. And then that shadow feels too saturated. So let's flip it. Let's try shadow. That's the same value that you have. It's just knocking out the saturation. But again, I wonder if it's too much saturation overall. So let's quiet down the shirt as well and just see. I think for the overall statement, this is closer. Even going even a little bit further, this is closer to what's happening in life. The blue shirt isn't really blue; it's kind of a gray. I feel it supports a little bit better, but maybe I've gone a little too far. So maybe we'll turn it back a little bit. So I want it to be, you can play up that blue color, which is good. You're looking for that sort of nuance in color and trying to push it. But I think it maybe went a little far, a little too saturated. So pulling it back a little bit, and then maybe what I'll do is I'll throw in some difference in color and temperature. So I'll go a little bit lighter, go a little bit warmer on some of the lights that are in and on the shirt. This will help to model the form. But at the same time, it's just breaking up sort of that heavy blue, and it will make it feel more like cloth a little bit. And then I'll do the same thing on the light side. I'm going to try to warm it up a little bit. Maybe we'll go towards like a green. Maybe we'll go towards a violet. Let's see. Yeah, feels a little bit more like towards a violet or something, but I'm going to desaturate it and then lighten it up a little bit. Whoa. So something like that, just, kind of breaking up that. We're going to get some color nuance, and it's going to feel a little bit more, developed in terms of the color, but it's not doing too much. So we're going from here, all blue, to a little bit more nuance, a little bit more supporting of the head. That's something that I might go for. Okay. The rest of the painting is just a matter of going through and just correcting some drawings. So his ear is a little wide. The shapes can just be carved down a little bit. This could be made a little bit softer. So meaning that the values happening in and around there are a little bit softer, and then I can find maybe a few dark hard edge shapes inside the ear, something like that. Can help with the ear to feel more like an ear and more like his ear. Although ears are not the most important thing, it is important that we get, as close as we can to the sense of reality. Then we can really get a little bit darker and a little bit warmer, I think, in the area of focus. So sort of like we'll go into this eye, and we can sort of darken it, make it richer. Darken it, make it richer. Here we go. Back to some of those, and that starts to help a little bit. So anyway, let's go back to the beginning. So we're getting a nice statement, nice painting overall. But I hope the decisions that I've showed you are trying to help inform you on how much power you have on determining what the image will look like at the end. And so I'm using ideas like darkening the background to support the shapes that I want. A little bit of drawing, being more careful about the shape. Reducing the contrast and maybe adding some variety into the supporting elements. And then just little dark accents and just a little bit more refinement. These are really small changes overall, though. These are really not that big of a deal, but they do make a big difference. This is where it goes from having where you go from 90%, you're at that 90% mark where your paintings are looking great. They're 90% there, and now you got to spend the extra time it takes to get you to that 100%. That time is never a wasted investment because you learn a lot when you try to take a painting from where it is to where it can go. But as far as how much time that takes to develop it that far, it can be anywhere from 2 times as much time as you spent on the rest of the portrait to all the way up to 10 times as much time. It's just trying to discover what it takes to take a painting from the stages you get it to from life and how you can get it to a finish later on. So anyway, it's looking really good. You're getting better and better each painting. It's just a matter of learning what will make the difference and getting it there. So anyway, great job. Let me know if you have any questions. Okay, we're to Meera. Nice painting, Meera. Too bad you guys left. You left the class. We talked about temperature, and I think it was pretty good for most people in terms of building in a sense of temperature to support the overall feel of the painting. And so, looking at this painting, it's pretty nice. In terms of the drawing and the values, looking really good. Now, the assignment was to try to push a better sense of color into sort of push the idea of what colors are happening in the face and kind of push them to give them an identity. And in this painting, it feels a little muted. It feels like we're kind of in the gray-brown range where color identity is sort of lost a little bit. So what can we do to kind of try to bring a sense of color, bring a sense of life into the painting where it's kind of lacking just a little bit in here? One thing I can do is bring warmth or a sense of temperature to my areas. And so instead of just saying, well, what color is that? What color is that? I start by saying, what temperature is it that I'm looking at? And looking at the shadow side, at least in the reference photo, feels quite warm. And so if I go in and I give a sense of warmth to those shadows, it starts to support the painting and give us a better sense of light and color in there. Same thing as I work into the rest of here. So I'm just going to color these in quickly. I'm going to adjust it in the Photoshop so that I can get a little bit quicker. But this is the general idea of what's happening is if I just try to hunt color after color or spot after spot, a lot of times I will fall on my face. Instead, I try to. Oh, that didn't quite work. Let's try color. There we go. Instead, I just tried to think of the bigger ideas. The shadow to me all feels quite warm. And that takes practice of looking at a lot of heads and doing that kind of thing. And it looks kind of yellow. And so if I'm going to make a decision in terms of color, I generally feel that a warm sort of yellowish color would be great. The light side feels a little pink. And generally, I tend to steer my colors a little bit more pink. The reason for that is on these paler complexion or lighter skinned or complected people, the skin is affected by the blood flowing underneath the skin, and so that'll give us a reddish tinge or a reddish tint to the skin. So often when I'm seeing a skin in light, even if it looks like as yellow as can be, often if I make it a little bit more of a red or a pink, it will feel more so like life and skin. It will feel a little bit more fleshy. And I know it's like kind of going against the edict of saying, skin tone doesn't kind of really have a skin, a sort of color to it. It's dependent upon the light shining on it. But as long as the color I lay down, so it could be like a purple, as long as that reads redder and kind of warm overall in relationship to the other colors I place on. It's not so much that it's a peach color, but that it reads as kind of a peachish color or whatever. Then it will feel more like flesh. So I'm getting that sort of warmth, that sort of pink into her skin tone, and that will feel a little bit nicer. I'm getting that little bit of warmth and yellow into the shadows, and hopefully that'll start breathing a little bit of life into the skin tone of what's happening in there. Let's go a little bit more neutral into some of these shadows. And I'm going to soften some of these edges as they start wrapping up into the rest of the shadow here. The idea is just to soften it out a little bit. Then maybe I can use a little bit of the same color that's on the face down into the neck here. Show a little bit of that form. Same thing through this hair. It's looking pretty black overall, but we can give it a color. We don't necessarily need to go with black, and so I'm going to just make it like a dull red. That's a little too dull. But if I just make it, a color, often it will just read true. It will just ring true with the viewer. Even though her hair isn't red, under this sort of lighting conditions, this darker value and everything, this will start to feel more like hair, regardless of her hair color. And that's kind of what I want, is that sort of value read is kind of the king for me. And then as we get closer to the area in light, we're getting a little bit more of a yellow, or a little bit warmer. Okay, maybe a little bit more neutral, maybe a little bit more green in the back. And then the area in light has a hue as well. We're going to make it like a kind of a pinkish, dull. It's a little bit cooler, I'd say, than the rest of the hair. And then we get another yellowish highlight. So you can start to see I hope, is that as I start making my way around the head, if I start assigning hues, as well as temperatures and everything, to the head, I start to get a more developed painting in this case. And this is where we separate painting from photography, is that, the photography will take a picture of what's ever there, and kind of just dull out the colors and the values, which, that's just what happens. But in painting, the strength is the nuance in color and the nuance in value, and so we need to play that up. And so I'm going to play in some of these colors here. The top is a little bit of a redder orange. And so I'm just putting in, it's not the exact right color, but the fact that I'm putting something in that's kind of close, and I'm kind of pushing that sense of color, that was kind of the idea of the assignment, but that's how we're separating and making this painting feel a little bit more special. Get a little bit more life in there that we otherwise wouldn't get. You can also get this sort of blue, really desaturated blue jacket. And I might put a sense of this in just to kind of finish out the statement here. So there's kind of an awkward tangent there. And so I might just take it. I might not do anything else with it than something like that. I might not do anything more with the neck than something like that. And maybe grab a little bit of a little bit of color, just kind of give some vignetted shape, something, just, I don't know, this is kind of really bad, but that's supporting and telling us that she's got, a neck and a body attached to her head. She's not so floating anymore. Put in a little bit of shadow down here. And even though I don't necessarily want you to fill out everything, we need a little bit more support to the head. And so finishing out and fleshing out a little bit more shoulder, a little bit more neck is going to help in that statement. Okay. Once I get this overall temperature, now I can see where it goes darker, a little bit redder in the areas like the cheek. And so now I can start developing those areas. Once I get the general temperature of the area, the general value, then I can start playing with things. So I can see where it goes a little bit lighter, a little bit cooler red up on the temple, and then it goes back into this warmth. And then that goes back into this warmth. There's some softening of edge. Maybe a little bit more of a red through here. And I know this isn't quite the colors because I'm just working off the photo, but even in the photo, I'm playing up the colors that I'm seeing. So for instance, we can go for a much more red or warm shadow in the eye here. Let's go even darker and associate a color with it. I'm just going to really blow out and make that thing orange. And I'm going to send it down. And just by assigning a color to it, to me, even if it's not the right color, which I think it can go maybe a little bit more red, maybe a little bit cooler, but by assigning a color to it, it just feels to me a little bit better. Bottom of the nose, make it that same kind of color. And make sure it's dark enough. Side of the nose, we're kind of losing a color identity there, so I'm going to play it up a little bit as a lighter kind of pink. And hopefully you'll start to see that by just pushing a sense of color into these areas, the skin will start to feel a little bit more like skin, and it will get a better sense of life. This is often the problem that people run into when you're looking at life and you're interpreting in terms of color, and so you're trying to get as literal as you can with the color, and then you're left with a statement that's kind of dead and drab. It's kind of weaker than life or what you were seeing, and it's often because we're not pushing, we're not interpreting the color as far as we can to get a feeling of life rather than trying to capture exactly what we think we're seeing. And so that's why I like to push the sense of color almost non-literally, and that starts to help. I think I went a little dark into this shadow, so I'll make it a little bit lighter, but I won't change the color any. And I hope that's starting to help. Go in with some darks and some lighter eyelid, and I mean I could go through and assign colors to all of these parts, including the eyelashes, including the lower lid. If what I'm after is a sense of life, I need to start trying to process it and being a little bit more non-literal. I'm trying to capture the essence of what I'm looking at and not the thing itself. It's kind of a weird statement, but I'm starting to realize that is painting. That is what we're after. Is a sense of what we're looking at, not what it is. So we go something a little more like that. So we're taking it from here and we're turning it into something a little bit more like here. We're getting a little bit more sense of life and color. I might do the same thing in and through the few of these shadows, just kind of soften them. Whenever I see anything a little too hard-edged on the face, it feels a little too architectural. I tend to just soften it out a little bit because the face is so soft. It's a soft material. The light is being cast over it is a little bit softer, and so I do see some hard edges. I tend to second guess them a little bit because it is on a soft surface. Some of these cast shadows can go a little bit harder. I get that. But you want to be, you want to be careful. You still want it to feel like skin. So Let's go a little bit redder. Put a little bit more sense of that hue in between the light and shadow on the nose. Maybe lighten up this nose a little bit and then soften that edge out. Something like that. So anyway, that's kind of the main ideas that I'm seeing here in this painting. As far as the rest of the painting goes, in terms of just taking it, making it look just a little bit more flattering of the model. I think it's just a matter of designing some of the shapes so they're a little more flattering. So, for instance, like tilting the lip, the edge of the lips up a little bit. So instead of going so down with it, maybe tilting it up slightly. I know her mouth does do this, but often if I can just turn it up just at the edge, it's just a little bit nicer. And they tend to, when the sitter gets up, and they see their mouth just all downturned, they're like, I'm not that grumpy person. It just feels a little too grumpy to be them. But that's why I tend to just turn it a little bit at times. So the shapes aren't too different, but I'm just kind of changing them. I don't know. Maybe it's dishonest, but I think it helps a little bit. Then we're losing a little bit. There's something going on here at the ball of the nose. Something through here. Kind of through here. Maybe a little bit of a darkening. Something like that. So anyway, there's a little nuance, little drawing we can do to try to set it to the next level. But what I really want to see is a better, stronger sense of color and a little bit more of a connection between the head and shoulders to kind of fill it out. You don't have to fill in the background. You don't have to do any of that. Really, all I'm looking at better color and better connection to some type of shoulder shape. That would be nice. Also, in terms of color, just try to associate it with temperature. So just warming it up, overall, looking for a definite hue in each of those areas. It does take time to develop your vision in order to see accurately the temperatures of the colors that you're seeing, but with practice you'll get there. So anyway, let me know if you have any questions. It's a really nice painting. It's just a matter of taking it to the next level. So anyway, let's go on to the next one. Okay, now we're to Eden. This is a nice one, Eden. We missed you on class. Brother Parson was saying that he was really impressed with the skin tones that you were getting in the painting. When he was walking around, he saw it. He's like, "Wow, those are looking really nice." And I tend to agree. And then he said, when he saw the painting, he said, "Why did she paint it so black under the nose? It's so dark." And I kind of agree with that. It's a little too dark. And I think what happened was painting from the photograph lends itself to going too dark, too cool, and there's not enough color left in there. So you've got some nice development of skin tones and light, but as you start going into the shadow, we start losing a color. We start losing the temperature, and it's losing that sense of life. The drawing is looking pretty good. I think her face got a little long on you, so the distance from her eyes to her chin just feels a little too big. I think it's primarily distance from her nose to her chin. And so I might just grab that and try to adjust that now. So let me just show you what I'm talking about. I think it would go a little bit more like this. Closer to something like this. So the distances between these areas are just much smaller in relationship to the rest of the head. I think too, though, now looking at it, this distance from the eyes to the nose is a little big as well. So something happened in that. So let's see. In that the proportions just got a little bit stretched out, I believe, just a little bit stretched out and made just a little bit bigger. So let me do this. So from there to there, it's not that big of a change, but I think it does definitely give a different feel overall to the painting. So I'm gonna go ahead and commit to that and kind of paint in this collar down here. Paint in this collar. That's kind of what I'm looking at. So it went from kind of a little too long, and I think it's a matter of comparing your heights to your widths a little bit more, and particularly the width of the eyes to the length of the head, to make sure that our proportions are getting a little bit closer. Then in terms of color, I think what needs to happen is we need to observe the overall temperature of the scene and try to do it by developing our sense of color. And so maybe what we need to do is have a master copy assignment so you can start to see how others approach a similar scene in similar colors. But really what I'm seeing is that the temperature of the shadows have gone very cold, very neutral, and I think we could do better with a little bit of a better sense of warmth and a little bit better sense of color into there. And so just to show you, let's go ahead and paint in a warmer, more saturated sense of color into these areas. Let's go a little bit more towards red, and a little bit darker and a little bit less saturated. A little bit less saturated. So I'm trying to give it a sort of red in hue. In terms of the shadow inside the eye here, I can use that very similar color, but I'm going to make it a definite red. So I'm going to give it a little bit more saturation than maybe what I'm looking at, and use that same sort of yellow hue from the side. I'm going to darken these up, and I'm going to give a hue to these areas. Sometimes what we're looking at is so neutral and just has no color to it. I find, at least I'm finding recently, that if I can associate a color, regardless of the saturation level that whatever I'm looking at, but if I can force a little bit more sense of color into the area, it feels more like life than not. And now it's hard to do that because you want to have a strong sense of life, and so I do let the colors influence me in terms of which one I'm going to choose to represent them. You know, if it's a gray that looks kind of blue, I'm going to use more of a blue color, or vice versa. But at the same time, I do kind of push it. I do kind of just give a sense of color into these areas. And it really, to me, helps with making it feel a little bit more like life. Okay, so even this shadow down here, we're going to go a little bit more yellow, we're going to go a little more saturated. And I'm just going to put some color in there. And maybe we can go a little bit warmer and even a little bit more saturated. There we go. Fun. So then as we wrap over the face, I'm going to get a little bit more of that color as it transitions over. So she looks like angry, kind of mad. And then it goes a little bit gentler and a little bit warmer feeling to the painting. And then we're going to paint the same warmth into this ear. I know it goes way neutral, and in the photo it looks way neutral. I'm going to force it towards a color. So I'm going to force it towards reds and yellows. So in the darkest recesses, I'm going to make it even redder. I'm not going to make it that saturated, but I'm going to try to give it some kind of life. A little more saturated. Something so that it has, some light bouncing around there. Light is the source of all color, And so if I want something to feel like it has, it's under a light source, and in fact all of this is under light source. Even the bits in shadow are giving off or receiving light. I need to have color attached to it. Um, that's the idea of the impressionist, and I wholeheartedly believe that if I'm going to err, that means if I'm going to make a mistake in color, either way, I'm going to try to add more color than not, and that will feel more like light and more like life, I think. Okay, so I'm going to go a little bit darker on the socket here, a little bit warmer. Um, and then between the skin tones, we're getting a fluctuation in temperature, which is good. We're getting some cools, we're getting some warms, we're getting some saturated, some desaturated. I think we can do with just a little bit more harmony between those colors. So I might breathe a little bit more warmth into the lower face, so it's not quite so cold. And then I might neutralize that saturation on that cheek just a little bit. And what you'll find is the skin tones will start falling in line a little bit more with each other, and that's that balance. I'm looking for that harmony, but I need that variety, and so I'm walking that thin line between doing it sort of too harmonized and boring, or too having too much variety and sort of losing um, any sense of organization. And so I want to organize the colors I'm seeing to have harmony, but enough color shift and enough temperature shift to have enough variety not to be boring. And so up here I might make it a little bit cooler to fit in, so it's having a little bit more in harmony with the rest of the colors, and then maybe push for a little bit more color and saturation. Maybe that's a little too much in the highlight, so going a little bit maybe pinker. So I'm going, trying to neutralize it, but I'm pushing a different sense. So I'm looking for that harmony in the skin tone, but trying to balance it with interest through variety. Okay. Those are my main critiques right now. It had to do with drawing. So the proportions were a bit out. They were a bit long. And then in terms of color, we're looking to add more color, and then support it through creating a sense of harmony with variety. Okay. I think we can probably get away with going. We can get away with going darker and putting in a bit more of a core shadow here on her cheek. Let's see if we can make a smaller brush. Going darker. Breathing maybe a little bit more of that yellow into there. So that's the main idea of what we're doing there. In the neck down here, we can probably go a little bit darker and a little bit warmer. Through the cast shadow on the neck, just to support the rest of the painting. I might just darken the whole neck just to unify it a little bit more. And so while this is one way to interpret the face, I think it's adding something that we were missing. We're looking for that variety and that balance. It's a hard thing, but I think the more we do it, the more we can know what to look for when we're looking at life. So we're also getting an ear over there, but I don't know if it's really helping. I don't think you added it there, which I think is a good thing. It's a good idea on your part. I think we can probably pull out her jaw a little bit on this side. And then possibly darken, send down darker, and give her a little bit of a longer neck over there. Other than that, it's great. It was great in spite of that. It was a great painting. overall you're getting really nice color, drawing, and form. It's just a matter of how can we take it and improve it. What can we do to improve the statement? Drawing is one. Adding color, looking for that harmony with that variety. That's really what we're striving for, at least in this assignment. So going forward, I mean, we can. I don't want to go. I don't want to belabor this too much, but we can continue to find statements of color in all the areas. So in their eyebrow, I can make it, a little bit warmer, a little bit more yellow, or maybe I make it a little bit redder, a little bit warmer that way. And so I'm just looking for those color shifts in the eyebrow. Maybe I make it a little bit more violet. Maybe I push that. Oops. Maybe I push that sense of that sort of violet a little bit through there. I push that sense and I get a better sense of the color, and just kind of playing around with it. So anyway, these are just some ideas. Let me know if you have any questions. I think overall, that's generally what I want to see kind of going forward with this assignment and kind of going forward with the semester. Just play with those ideas. Let them marinate for a little while. Think on them. Let me know if you have any questions, and we'll go on to the next one. So, good job. So we're to Blakeley. And Blakeley, we were pushing the sense of color. I know this is kind of outside of your realm of comfort, but I think you really went for it on this one. I know there was some struggle in terms of the drawing. I think throughout it, and that's okay. But looking at it in terms of color, I like that you started to push this sense. Now, as we start to look at these paintings, what we're really looking at is when we get that variety, if we can place it within a structure, namely temperature, then the variety feels more at home, and we're still getting that interest, and that's a real balancing act that we're playing with. So, for instance, we're getting this green, and this orange, and this red, and this yellow, but they're jumping too far in terms of temperature. I love the color variety, but maybe we can hone it in so that it has a stronger sense of harmony through temperature. So let me show you what I mean by that. So let's take a little bit of a color here, and let's just try to harmonize them a little bit so that there's still that variety, but they have something a little more in common. So they already are starting to get value in common a little bit more, but you can see as I knock it down a little bit, they'll start to sit a little bit closer together. Now I don't know if I went too far, but let's go ahead and I also want to reduce some of the value shifts as well, just because they're jumping a little too far at this point. So a little too dark red and a little too light green. But this is the balancing act that I want you to kind of see, is that we're trying to get the idea of color variety, but we're trying to balance it through temperature. And this is kind of what we're looking at. So we're getting that variety, but maybe we pull it back just a little bit. So we're skirting that line. We're saying we need some interest. How are we going to create it? And you can push those colors. You don't want to push them so far that it breaks the illusion of everything that's happening there. So down in the neck, it appears to be going quite dark. I think we can assign a color to it. Let's make it like a yellow. I don't know. The photo I took probably is just a poor photo, but I can try to strive for a little bit different sense of color through there, and let's see what it looks like. Just trying to associate a color with it. I don't think it's working yet. So even more saturated. Okay, so we go with a red. So that's fine. And then the neck down here, maybe we can put some of the same colors through here. So we're still getting that variety, that shifting in tone, but it's metered, it's grouped, and that's kind of the idea. I know I'm not explaining these things as good as I can, but you guys are kind of a guinea pig class so I can figure out exactly how I want to explain these things. But I think eventually I'll land on it, and hopefully it'll be by the end of this class at least. Anyway, and so as we're looking at some of these things, we're just trying to get that variety and meter it. So getting that variety, and you're getting some nice saturated tones in and around there. Lighten some of them up. Meter some, so it's going cooler, it's going warmer. I'm having an overarching either hue or temperature of the area to make sure that when I go warmer or I go cooler, that it's not too much, that it doesn't break. So I'm adding that variety, but I need that harmony to hold it together. Okay. So just trying to hold it together. I might even make her smile, a little bit. She looks so grumpy. Just kind of, turn it up just a little bit. Maybe even make some of these shadows a little bit smaller so she doesn't look so mad. Just turn it up just maybe a little bit. It doesn't hurt. And give her a little bit of a lighter bottom lip. Just to keep it in form with everything else. And we can give her a little bit, I think, a little bit of a bigger chin. And push that chin out. And then I'm going to soften these edges just to give her a rounder chin. And then a little bit bigger eyelid, I think, on this, on this other side, on this far side. Just a little bit bigger, and then maybe, and now I know she's moving, but probably carve off a little bit of forehead. Pull that back a little bit. I think that will start to help. So that's kind of the idea that I'm looking at here. So we're pushing for that variety, which I know is really hard thing to want to do, and so I'm really glad to see that you're pushing the envelope, trying to go beyond what you're comfortable with, and that's great. That's, as a teacher, that's what I want to see. And now that you've gone far enough, it doesn't matter of pulling it back, and so walking that edge and seeing what you can get away with. And it's really, that's what we're playing. That's the game we're playing, is we're trying to, push the envelope, but then pull it back just enough that it works. So we see this really intense green up here. That's wonderful. Maybe we need to pull it back a little bit, though. Hone it in terms of value and maybe a little bit of saturation. So we still get a sense of it, but it's not out of harmony as much. We can push it. We can really push it, but we're gauging it. We're seeing what we're doing or what it's doing. So we get some lighter bits in here. I don't quite know what is that hair. I think it's hair. And and so it looked a little bit like cloth, and I think it's because of the red. So I might just tone it down just a little bit. Just in terms of value. The neck down here is catching a lot of attention. I might bring that down as well. Right? So just in terms of value, maybe bring back the light side just a little bit. Or something like that. Just trying to tone it down a little bit. But that's the main idea. I know you have the ability, I've seen it, to do the sort of refined portrait, which is awesome. And so that's why I like to see you pushing the envelope and trying to grow. Even though it's frustrating, and I give you a hard time about it, I think pushing ourselves to make ourselves uncomfortable, even if we don't like the idea, or we won't necessarily paint this way forever or whatever, we can gain some really good insight by stepping out into that area. And I'm a real believer in that. So anyway, those are my main sort of critiques. So we're just going to the edge of variety and then pulling it back. Going as far as we can go and then maybe honing it in just a little bit. Harmony with variety. That's how we're making it. That's how we're starting to try to make it work. So quieting things down and pulling it in. So anyway, there's a little bit in drawing. There's a little bit of other drawing things, but I won't go into depth there. I know you can draw. It's just a matter of putting in the time to correct some of the things. So I won't go too far in terms of showing you how to correct that, but those are the main ideas in terms of color. Let me know if you have any questions. I mean, it's a really nice painting. It was a nice experiment. Now it's just a matter of controlling it, learning to push it and control it. So anyway, let's go on to the next one. Sort of Dasha, and this is looking good. Dasha, I think something happened from when you were painting it from life to painting it from the photo. I'm not sure what the difference is or what sort of happened. Maybe you didn't touch it. Maybe maybe I'm remembering incorrectly. But I liked how it was being developed. I liked that you were pushing this idea of color and contrast and then pulling it back. I really like that sense. But now, looking at the photo and at the painting, it feels a little like it's lacking some contrast. It's lacking a bit of color nuance, just a little bit. And so, what I might have you do is just push a little bit of contrast, a little bit of drawing in some of these areas. So for instance, the drawing and the contrast in this eye right here, this is critical to getting my standards right. So if I see his eye as being really dark and really round, I want to make sure that I'm nailing it as such. Then from there, we have to pay closer attention to what the shapes are doing on the rest of his face. So while there is an eyebrow, and I want to continue it all the way over, on both accounts, the eyebrow doesn't go all the way over. In fact, it's just a light shape. The dark shape being formed on his face are much smaller than what you might consider. I think it's because of the sort of lack of eyebrow or the thinner eyebrow. And so when I'm looking at a shape, I'm trying to really process what I'm seeing, and so by squinting down, that really helps me to do that. So I'm going to go a little bit lighter, and then I'm going to make these shapes just a little bit smaller. Maybe get a little bit more warmth in and around the socket here. And then what I would recommend is pushing the idea of shape. So whenever I see an area, I went a little too light there. Whenever I see an area that of importance on the model, I try to say, what is the shape I'm seeing? I try to be as specific as I can. So each stroke is a very specific shape. Or each series of strokes is building up a very specific shape, and once you start slowing down and looking more specifically at each shape as you paint or draw it, you'll start getting a likeness way faster, and the rest of the paint just start falling into place. So, for instance, like the front plane of his nose, what's the shape here? Well, it comes down and then it turns into this ball. It's a very specific shape. And I don't want to fuss with edges. I don't want to do too much. I just want to get the value and general color down and the as close to a shape as I can approximate. I'm not going for every nuance on the shape, at least at the beginning. I'm not. And I'm just trying to hone in the shape as much as I can. So while it feels a little funky now, with time, I can then bring back that nuance, bring back that careful drawing and color and edge. Um, but it's being built onto something that is going to give me a little bit better of a likeness. Likeness isn't our end goal, really. You know, I don't care if I think this model's name is Ryan, but nobody really cares what Ryan looks like. You know, there probably are some, but in terms of our painting class, it doesn't matter. You know, if you paint Ryan, and even in most galleries, they don't know whether it's specifically him or not. But most people know when it feels like a human face and when it doesn't, and so paying attention to those shapes makes it feel more like a human, and when it feels more like a human, it gives a better sense of life, and when it has that, you sell paintings more. And so it does pay off to get accuracy. So let's get a little bit of a darker. So you're getting that subtlety and value, but I would have you maybe for the time being to push the difference in your groups. You know, don't the values you're seeing are great, but let's push the contrast. Let's make a painting. You know, let's make it something more than what we're seeing, right? Let's make it stronger. Let's make it more dramatic. Let's make it have a mood, or have it tell a story, and that requires some effort on our part. You know, we're not just going to settle for whatever the model gives us. We're using the information he's giving us to say something about it. You know, we're trying to say something about whatever it is we're looking at, and not just copy it. And so that's why it requires us just to, you know, push contrast, push color, push temperature ideas. You know, I'm trying to just bring the drawing back around, but with all of these ideas, I'm trying just to develop them in a positive direction. So we're seeing that his hairline is a little too big. We're seeing that his chin, I think, is a little too small. Gotta bring out his jaw. He's got a strong turn here on his jaw. Bring it down more. And there's still something that's going weird, and I think it's the distance between his eyes. Let's see if that'll work. It's getting closer, but now there's a problem with the overall proportion of the head. I'm kind of messing this whole thing up. I'm trying to find my way and trying to make the correction, but I'm kind of getting lost here a little bit. And I see a plumb line issue as well. That will probably do it. If I put the nose in the correct spot, I think that should help. So if I do an alignment, you can see we're a bit off. So I'm going to take this, carve it in, carve it in more. And this is going to help to align his head in the right direction, bring his nose down to the right, a little bit closer size, and that will start to help. A lot of times when I get lost in terms of losing a likeness, or not making it look not like him, a lot of times I find that by just doing some simple alignments, that solves most of the problems, or it helps me identify most of the problems. So I encourage you to try it. Not just when there's a problem, but start doing alignments earlier on in the painting process, you'll start finding errors a lot sooner. So rounding, whiting out some of this information down here, making his jaw or chin just a little bit bigger. And then giving him more jaw underneath over here, making this neck needs to be smaller on all fronts, so we need to make it smaller and make it smaller. I think I have the tendency as well to make necks too big when I'm not being careful. And so I tend to need to measure more. And you'll find that even if I mess up the proportion of the chin to the the sternal notch, or where the neck kind of meets, the clavicles. No, is that right? Clavicles? Yeah, I think that's right. Anyway, the collarbones. That I can get a better likeness. Do you see how that feels more like him? I haven't really changed much. Changed his chin shape. I changed the shadow. But mainly that neck is changing, and it feels more like him. I don't know. Maybe I'm just seeing things, but I find that if I can get that measurement right, it will start to give a greater sense of likeness. So we're looking for more definite shape. That's the number one thing, is when you have a tendency to go soft, which is good. But on that, we need to find definite shape to all of our areas. And it doesn't mean that we're identifying the exact edges and everything like that. We're kind of boiling down what we're looking at into an easier to process shape. Okay, I think that will help. Overall, I think the color and the value, it feels like a skin tone. It feels good. I think maybe because of the photo, it feels a little overworked, meaning that there's like a little too much nuance in terms of value jumping around. And so I might just quiet down a little bit some of those areas just to make it feel a little more like flesh, a little bit clearer what's happening. Something like that. And then we can probably get away with just a lighter, brighter, white of his eye, maybe a little highlight, maybe a little bit like that. And it's hard to get any real color information from the photo, but what we can do is push a better sense of hue around on this painting. So highlights can take on a pinker. Let's send it more pink. Let's make these ones a little bit more yellow down on the cheek. Let's make his cheeks a little bit lighter and a little bit more yellow. Maybe I make that one a little bit more of a pink. Yeah, make it a little bit lighter. Right? Let's quiet it down. It's a little strong. A little too saturated. Right? And then down here, let's make it just, we're gonna make it really weak, but I'm gonna try to give it a similar tone to the rest of the surroundings, so it's sort of more yellow. Then through here, I'm gonna try to give a little bit of a shift. It's going a little bit darker, a little bit yellower. Maybe go a little more saturated, a little bit warmer. Something like that, just to help find a little bit more landmarks through there. And then soften some of these edges. So on his hair, I need to bring down his hair through here. And then on the hair, I can give a little bit of a color. So let's go to a cool red. Let's put a little bit of a cool, I'm gonna go darker, cool red through some of these areas. something like that. And the ear feels fine. It just needs some more shape to it. So with those darks, I'm just going to put a little bit more shape into these areas, and hopefully it'll feel more like an ear. It feels what I think it does when you start nailing down shapes, you know, and kind of saying the highlight is this shape rather than the highlight's kind of this shape, is it feels confident, and people can sense that in the painting, and they like that. So anyway, going from the beginning to kind of the end, it's just a little bit of drawing. Oops. A little bit of drawing and a little bit of more shape and color nuance. It's really not much, but you know, I could keep going on this to try to get a stronger likeness and make it, you know, look more like him. And you know, I made him look really, really young, but I think it made him look a little bit more like him, which is good. I think, though, with that, it's the same process of just processing all the shapes and making sure that they're working. You know, and there's nothing kind of standing out too much. So anyway, let me know if you have any questions. It's looking good. That's probably where I would steer it. Yeah, let's go on to the next one. Okay, we're to Victoria. This is a really strong painting, Victoria. We already talked about some of the solutions, but just to show you, we're getting this green, this secondary green light source, and this kind of comes down to when we are looking at an area, we're just trying to say, okay, I see that there's a color there. Does, you know, I want that variety, but does it break the harmony of the piece? Can I create a better statement of harmony if, for instance, I quiet down that green? Do you see how now it feels a little bit more like skin tone? You know, maybe we can pull it back a little bit. Maybe we go where we're still getting that green, but it's even more harmonized. So that's the idea, is we're playing with, you know, we're interpreting color, we're interpreting life. We're not trying to simply capture every note for note thing. We're trying to distill it down to its simplest essence and then interpret that. And if it helps our image, if it helps us get a better sense of life, then include it. If it breaks the image, this is what I consider kind of breaking the image, then I do away with it, or I subdue it. I want the harmony. I need the harmony. Otherwise, people will not look at your image. But if you get too much harmony, then they don't want to look at it either. So we're walking an edge in between there. Some other things I would do is, in terms of drawing accuracy, I would carve off some of this side of his face. Mainly where his cheekbone is. It's just gone a little too big over there. Carving it off ever so slightly, and then using my shadow, my new shadow color, to bring the shadow to the edge over here, and that will help to round that face a little bit better. Okay. There are other bits of color nuance that you're pushing that I think are great. I think I want to see more of them. I'm seeing where you go pink in here. That is wonderful. That's a wonderful little note. It might be a little strong, but then we can pull it back. I can also see where maybe we can get away with a little bit more of that pink type color, and we can push it in other areas on the face. So making the lights just take on that same kind of pinkish color through here, and kind of quiet down some of this. Could be nice. Some of this, the highlights are reading really strong, but maybe we can soften some of the transitions on the face. It's really, really nice, but maybe it's a little strong everywhere. So the difference between this highlight and the surrounding half tone, maybe I can quiet it down. Maybe I can quiet down you know, we still need that form on that forehead, but maybe we don't need it as much. Maybe we're seeing this transition, but maybe we can soften the the differences between them. So trying to limit the amount of modeling I'm doing to keep a simpler statement. Also, I can see where we can maybe get away with a little bit darker on this far side cheek to help with the sense of form falling over the model. So the light's hitting us in the top right, and as that form falls over, we're getting weaker as we go to the other side, and so sometimes I play that up. I quiet down that far side, and that helps with that. Some of these differences in here, these are all being hit by light, and so I want to be careful with the amount of contrast I place into those areas. Okay. As this nose is approaching the edge, we can, or on the ball of the nose, I can darken it. And we're losing a bit of that pink, but we're gaining some form on that nose. Quiet down some of these like acne scars through here. Quiet down, unify the lights, unify the shadows. We're looking for that variety. At the same time, we're trying to unify it. So it's a balancing act, and you're doing a really great job of it. These are just little suggestions on what I might do to take it to the next level. So quiet down the differences. And by quieting down the differences, the group or the whole reads clearer rather than the parts. And for me, the whole is more important than the parts. Something like that. So going from we're getting some really nice shifts. We're getting some really nice color and nuance, but maybe limit them in terms of value and try to rely more on color to make those shifts, that nuance, rather than a bunch of values modeling the surface. So it's probably what I might steer it towards. Okay. Looking at the rest of the painting, there's really not much else to say. I might, get a little bit more nuance and a little bit, I might make him a little bit of a happier guy if I kind of bring it to a dot here, sort of where his muscle surrounds, and then I kind of eliminate a little bit the little downturn. It can be a little bit nicer in terms of creating a little bit of a happier portrait. We can probably get away with just a little bit more light on this bottom lip. I went too far and I lost hue, so I need to come back. Let's try again. There we go. A little bit better. And grab a little bit more light. It's just a little bit. It's just a little change, but we're getting a little bit happier. We're getting a little bit more subtle in our transitions, and the face is getting less modeled in terms of value. But we're getting that same changes with color and temperature. So we're going from here to here. I feel like it's getting a closer sense of light and life through there. So it's not so much that we can include every shift, it's just how we can include those shifts without sacrificing the overall harmony or the overall read of the value group and the overall temperature and color of those main groups. And so that's mainly what we're looking at there. So in terms of drawing, I think his chin is a little big too. Let's just see what we can do about. Let's just see what it would look like if I do this. I'm just gonna make it smaller. See if it looks more like him. I think it does, and then I think as well this eye might be too big. I think it's mainly this one. Show you. Something like that. I think it's closer, but I'm still not sold. I think this guy needs to go out as well. So we go from here to there. I feel like we're getting a closer likeness. We're getting a closer grouping of value and color. And just finishing off the portrait. And now these are all just ideas. Don't just jump and do all of them. But these are just some things that you can maybe consider in terms of possibly taking this painting and taking it to the next step, or trying to finish it in a different way. So anyway, it's really, really great stuff. I can't encourage you more. Like even Brother Parson, he was really impressed. It's really strong painting. These are just ideas of maybe things we can think about as we're painting next time. You know, these are ideas that maybe we can incorporate into our arsenal. So really great stuff. I'm really proud of you. Let's go on to the next one. And this is Carolyn. This is great, Carolyn. I'm seeing improvement in your work, and it makes me so happy because I'm seeing some definite growth. Your last in-class temperature one that we were doing, oh, it was super good. It was looking really awesome, and this is no exception either. I feel like you're finding your way. You're realizing that you're simplifying the matter. You're definitely honing in on things, on shapes and on colors, and I personally find that it's stronger when we can find those things, find those simple statements, and then build upon them rather than sort of get all this information and have to pull it back. And so I think what you're doing really, really great. The photo I took is a little washed out, meaning that the darks went a little too light. So I'm not going to really comment too much about the value range through there, but it's really, really feeling quite strong overall. Looking at it, trying to decide on, it doesn't quite look like him, and I'm trying to decide on what it is, and I think it could be the mouth and chin down here. So what I'm going to do is which is, you know, it's a tendency when we see somebody with fuller lips, we tend to make them even more full. When we see them with a nice big chin, we tend to make it bigger. I think by lowering that down or shortening that up, that's gonna help to get a likeness. Also, let's see what we can do about finding out where this chin is. It's behind the nose. Okay. Okay, so it looks pretty close, but there's something about that jaw that doesn't quite feel right. Maybe it's the shape up here, and then maybe it's coming out a little too far. Still don't feel like that chin is coming out far enough, though. Interesting. I also feel like this shape here is too big, but I'm not sold on it. One thing I do want to have you look at is putting a little bit more of a temperature, a little bit more of a warmth into some of these shadows, especially on a warm, dark skin tone like that, like he has. Even in shadow, it's gonna have a warmth to it, and so I'm going to just push it just warmer. Push it warmer, and it will still have the same relationship to the face that this one did, pretty close, but it just has a little bit more warmth, and that tends to feel a little bit more like skin. if I ever go too cold, too gray anywhere on skin, it will start to feel a little dead. And so I want to be aware of that and try to limit how many really neutral, cool grays I'm putting on the face, unless it is under a cool light or something like that. Yeah, the shape. What is happening with this shape? Does it need to come forward? Possibly. Actually eliminate some of this. Still feel like there's something going on that I'm missing. Maybe it's this shadow should be a little bit larger. This mouth, let's do a plumb line. This mouth should be at the front of the, wait, let me do a smaller line. Should be at the front of the eye, and we're getting that at the front of the eye, but there's something really not quite right. Maybe it's this mouth, this side of the mouth. Front of the nose, center of the eye, front of the nose. So these placements are getting right, but there's something about them that's just not sitting right yet. Can't tell. It's really tough because the alignments are working, and generally what that tells me is that it is a size thing. But I'm struggling to find the size problem here. So that's quite tough. Could it be that the no, it doesn't look like the nose. It doesn't look like the eye. I don't quite know what it is. It's kind of frustrating. Let's turn the chin up first. See what that does. Round this out. And overall, I'm just kind of making him smaller in proportion. I don't know if that's the right answer. I'll wipe these out real fast. Yeah, it's pretty tough. Finding the differences because the alignments are working pretty good. For some reason, I just have trouble sometimes just seeing error, and I think in this case it is just a little bit of a harder problem here. What could I say to help when I can't even find the problem? Ugh, I'm a horrible teacher. Is it the forehead? Is it that the forehead is too large and maybe a little too light? Let me just carve off this forehead. that's obviously not the solution. Let me carve it off just a little bit more. That's too much. Oh, shoot. Still something. I'm not sure what it is though. I'm sorry. I wish I had always had the answer, but I'm just coming up a little short on this one. I think it's headed in the right direction in terms of the corrections being made to make it look more like him, shortening out the relationships of height to width. But I'm not 100% sold yet that it looks like him yet. Oh well, we'll move on. Anyway, what we need is a little bit more color, and so I'll push a little bit more of a temperature thing in the highlights, so pushing it a little bit cooler and a little bit redder. Make it a little bit lighter and even a little bit cooler for his eye socket. And for here we can go back to that kind of pink. And then in between those areas I can look for a little bit more saturation. Just pushing a little bit more of like his skin tone kind of color in between light and shadow. Maybe even soften out a little bit of the form over here. And maybe even put in a little bit more of a color on this far side cheek. I think it's going a little too light all the way to the edge, and so I want to darken it up just a little bit. And then darken up the whole chin. I can put back in the highlight here in a second. Whoops. Go something like that. Put in the highlight a little bit more. Something along those lines. So really, I mean, it was really strong paint to begin with. I'm just playing with color and playing with drawing a little bit. So just a little more shape, a little more color, but it's really great painting. I'd also add more color into the ear, more warmth. It feels a little gray, a little dead. And then in the shadow, I would probably get away with, you know, more of a reddish, warm, dark accent inside that ear, rather than a super gray color. In the light on the hair, I'd probably try to give it a color as well. Just going, you know, super dark, but trying to give it, you know, just a little something. Maybe not that. Just a little bit of a hue, maybe. It's pretty gray, which I think is okay, but I can always just attach a hue to something. You know, maybe not that one though. It'll look kind of bad. Maybe more of like a cooler, bluer color. I can't see his hair, so I'm just kind of scribbling here. But I might carve off a little bit there, and then make his hair a little bit warmer in the shadow, like a warm violet or something. And that might help with the sense of color as well. So anyway, those are my main ideas. Just a little bit of drawing, a little bit of color, but it's really making sense and really coming around. So great stuff. Let me know if you have any questions, and that's it. So that's the last critique. So thank you all for watching it. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you in class in a little bit.